In this video, we are going to get serious about cooling upgrades for my 1978 Power Wagon. We're ditching the stock mechanical fan for a set of dual fans from Derale. We're also going to install their PWM controller, which allows you to soft start the fans and ramp up cooling depending on the coolant temperature. In a prior video, I installed a set of fans from Derale in my 1981 big block Chevrolet pickup, and it worked perfectly. So when I ran into some issues with my 78 Power Wagon, I knew that they were the right folks to call. But this time I'm doing something a little bit better and more modern to ensure that cooling is optimum, I don't damage the fans, and I'll have nice, smooth, and quiet operation. At the heart of this upgrade is the PWM electric fan controller. Now what's really cool about this is it can control up to 2 fans. It's rated for up to 70 amps, which is more than enough for this 28 by 16 electric fan. And it slow ramps the fans on. So you only get the fan speed that you need. Soft start is gonna help you with fan life. It's gonna help you with noise. And overall, it's gonna be a little bit easier on your electrical system. One of the cool trick things I noticed here is you don't actually have to tap into your coolant system and potentially introduce another leak point. This is made to stick right on the side of your radiator to get a true and accurate temperature without any drilling required. Speaking of coolant temperature, it's very easy to make adjustments. Now from the factory, this is set to have the fans come on right around 180 degrees. But if you don't like that, you can easily pop this off on the side, adjust for hotter or colder turn on operation, and then monitor your coolant temps and make adjustments as necessary. Now let's talk about the wiring real quick, and then we will open up the box and show you what the fans look like. Like most installations, you want to make sure you get a clean power source. So starting from the positive, you're going to have a positive that comes into your circuit breaker, which is supplied. And then you are going to have the positive going out to the big red wire on the controller. Very simple. Ground is simple as well. You're going to come from the black wire, okay, on the controller, and that's going to go straight back to battery. Now the only other ground you're going to need to mount is the ground for your fans. And it does give you options for a single fan, a 2-speed fan, or a dual electric fan setup, just like this one. Very simple, follow the instructions, ground to ground. The blue wire is the power that's going to come in and tie into your fans. And then you have a 12-volt switched, so when your key is on and you see 12 volts and your key is off, it's off, that's this wire. Now you also have a green wire, which I'll talk about here in a second. So the green wire is pretty trick. Now you could use this a couple of different ways. You could hook this up to a switch inside your vehicle. If you kick that switch on, what it's gonna do is it's gonna ramp the fans up to 60%, and it'll adjust from there. You could also hook it up, let's say you have air conditioning in your vehicle. When you kick the AC on, you want a little bit of extra fan to ramp up. That's something else you can do with it. Very cool. Another really cool feature about this entire system is when you turn the vehicle off, it's gonna allow the fans to run for about another 20 seconds and just continue to cool the vehicle down as you walk away. Very trick stuff. Honestly, probably too cool for my 78 Dodge, but I really think it's gonna help the cooling issues that I've been having thus far. Let's open up the box and see what you get. Now, when you buy fans from Derale, you've got a lot of different options. I opted to get the kind of somewhat standard, not the brushless, but you could go that route, a dual fan. There's a tiny bit of assembly required, so to speak, but it's really not that difficult. There's this little rubber kind of grommet shield, whatever you want to call it. It goes around the edge of the shroud, and the purpose of this is when you bolt everything up, you don't want to accidentally gouge your fins or damage your radiator. So take your time with this, but don't worry, they give you plenty of extra length. What I did at the very end here is once I get it in place, I took a little bit of electrical tape just to make sure everything stays exactly where it needs to. Now, obviously, if you haven't removed your stock fan yet, you're gonna need to do that. I chose to use a ratcheting wrench in this instance. Now, I will tell you, just be careful. If your hand slips and you hit one of those fan blades, it's gonna hurt. So take your time, but that should come out somewhat easily. In this case, I did not have to remove the shroud first. A quick note though on fasteners. It's possible your bolts could be too long. You go and reinstall them and you run the risk of them rubbing on your water pump. Usually not an issue, but just take care because when you remove that fan, you're removing some amount of thickness. So just be careful, you don't want to destroy a water pump that way. I actually lucked out here. My water pump pulley didn't slip or move, so I was able to just run inside, grab those bolts I just showed you, and start threading them back in. You want to make sure that you don't have anything slip or move. If you do, you may have to loosen your belts and get everything back realigned. Once that's on and torqued, it's time to pull off your fan shroud, but be careful, these old things might be brittle.
you break it?
The next step is to test fit the shroud to get your bracket alignment correct. Okay, this part is pretty important because you're not going to be able to access the bolts on the inside of the shroud. So what you want to do is figure out how it's going to mount. Now in this case, there are holes down here, but they don't line up perfectly with the studs that I already have. So I've got my brackets in place. I've traced everything. It wouldn't even hurt probably to label which bracket goes on which side. And then you're going to go and attach the brackets from the inside going out. And then you may have to drill some extra holes, but this is why you mark it all out first. It'll make the install a lot easier. Okay, you may not have to drill any holes in your application. However, due to the way that my radiator was set up, I could capture 4 bolts, but then I didn't have a good way to capture the bolts on the bottom. So rather than try and use the slots, I decided to drill my own holes. It's not a big deal. It's aluminum, but just remember to measure twice and drill once. Okay, now that we got everything more or less mounted up from the bracket standpoint, I went and got some wire. This is 8 gauge. It's honestly probably overkill, but the reason I'm going that much, I'll flip the camera around and show you. So because these are dual fans, these are going together and then they're gonna feed back out and hook up. So I went and got this larger wire since I'm gonna be doubling those two together. 2 things I will say here, take your time on this step. The reason being is once the fan is installed, any sort of connections you make inside the shroud are gonna be difficult to get to. If you need to troubleshoot something, the fan is gonna have to come completely out of the car for you to access it. Also, fans draw a decent amount of amperage. In this application, each fan is 25 amps, so you wanna make sure you have nice, solid, weather-tight connections that you never have to worry about in the future. Okay, we got our grommet with our wires running out the side, extra heavy duty. And this is gonna be a really solid connection. You could solder these. I wound up using crimp connections. These are the better style that you can shrink down on. And then I just zip tied everything out of the way. It's now ready to go inside the vehicle. It never hurts at this step to have a helper. The reason I say that is you need to snake this entire fan shroud assembly into the vehicle, and you want to make sure you don't bump the fins in your radiator too bad. You don't want to beat up the fan, so I had my wife kind of help hold stuff out of the way to get it in place. Once it's in place, if you took all your measurements right, it's just time to tighten everything down and then just admire the beautifully installed fans in your vehicle. Don't these things look sweet? The other thing I love about electrical fans is you won't constantly hear the fan running like a mechanical fan every time you rev the engine up. All right, let's talk about the electronics. Next, you want to figure out where you're going to mount everything. Now, a couple things I will point out from the instructions. You don't really want to mount this anywhere where it's going to get direct contact from water and road debris. So we're going to mount it up next to where the stock ECU is, which I feel like is relatively safe. But you'll see me throw the camera on and shut the hood just to make sure that my hood hinge doesn't come down and hit this. We're going to confirm that we've got tons of clearance. The last thing we want to do is get this all mounted and then find out you smack it with something and damage the control. It's going to go right about here, give or take, and then this is going to give us a nice short wiring for everything. So everything going to our battery, it's literally like less than a foot away. The one thing that I did have to make sure is that this guy, which is going to go to the side of the radiator, is in a good spot that it can still reach. They recommend you pre-drill with a 5/32 drill bit, and that is the correct size for both the controller and the breaker that you will have to mount later. At this point, if you go back earlier in the video, you can see where I talk about where all the wires go. It's very simple, read the instructions, but a couple things to point out. You definitely don't want to have any of your wiring in an area that's going to be chafed, whether it's by the hood or rubbing on some sort of sharp object. At the end here, I do put all my wiring in some sort of loom, and eventually I'm going to mount the battery in a more stable and permanent position. Right now it's just kind of being held down by bungee cords, which is not great because you don't want that to slosh around and pull on any of your wiring that's delicate. But again, get everything measured, cut, crimped, connected, and then shield everything. I do also like to use those little P-clamps or 8L clamps as they're called, just to make sure things, if they were to move, can't move too far and stay in the general location that you place them. One added tip, and this is not required if you've got a nice modern electrical system, and it's really not even required unless you feel like it is, but we're going to be installing a shunt wire, and this is like a 6-gauge wire. It's pretty thick, and it's going to run directly from the alternator, the positive, the battery on the alternator, back to the positive on the battery. The reason for this is because these old Mopars, they actually run back through the ammeter in the cab, which I've sort of already bypassed, but it's a really long circuitous way. And if you measure it, you get a decent amount, I'll say, of voltage drop. And we're gonna try this out. One of the Mopar guys online really recommended this. It'll just give a more direct path back to the battery. So hopefully it works. We shall see, but we're gonna give it a shot. If it doesn't, we can yank it off. Rather than making this video too crazy long, because some of the comments I get say, hey, I like your videos, they're really informative, but they're just too long. We're gonna hit pause for here right now, and here's why. I'm gonna show you the shunt wire here in a second, how I routed it and everything. And everything is wired. It's wired, it's installed. For all intents and purposes, you could basically go out and drive the vehicle right now. But we are gonna hit pause because after speaking with Derale, I learned that my stock alternator, which is a 60 amp alternator, is really not ideal for this new fan. These fans can draw up to 50 amps total. So you figure a 60 amp alternator and 50 of those amps could be used just to power the fans. That's not enough for everything else. You're just putting undue strain on the system. And actually the controller is smart enough to ramp back if it feels like it's overdrawing. So we're gonna hit pause for right now. I am ordering a brand new alternator, a 100 amp alternator, a new voltage regulator. We're gonna get that all installed, and I may even go and install an inline fuse to that shunt wire just to be extra safe in case something were to ground itself out, that the fuse would blow instead, just for a safety measure. But in the next video, we're gonna get everything fired up, and I'm gonna show you the tuning process, how to set the fans, all that stuff, how to set up your AC override or a switch in the cab if you want that. And then we'll test the fans out and see how they work. Now we are in Salt Lake City, we're at high elevation and it gets hot here in the summertime. People think because you're in Utah or Salt Lake City, maybe some people think, oh, it just snows all the time, it's cold, but that's not actually the case. So in the next video, we're gonna get everything tuned in, dialed in, and I will show you how the fans work. Hopefully you found this video entertaining and it's helped you install the fans. Go back and watch that first video that I posted like 4 years ago when I sold another set of fans from the same manufacturer, but with a much more basic setup. Maybe that's how you want to install your fans. You don't want to use the PWM controller. Hey, that's fine. Derale has you covered for that as well. Go back and watch that video. But please like this video, share it, subscribe to my channel, and then you will get a notification when my next video posts and we finalize the install. Thanks for watching.